This is a video about changing key. I'm going to try and keep it as simple as I can, stepping through different ideas about changing key, talking to some great artists, and playing some examples from current artists and from the past. And it might be one of those episodes that you want to watch chapter by chapter and familiarise yourself a little bit with the material that I'm playing. Probably fair to say that modulation goes in and out of fashion in sort of cycles, really. In pop music, it wasn't so popular in the 50s, say, but it became more popular in the late 60s and 70s. In classical music, it was a massively important thing in the 19th century and not so much now. Have you ever, in the sort of pop songs that you've written in the last few years, have you ever used a modulation?
Not in any that have gone anywhere.
I like key changes. If I'm listening to Stevie Wonder or something, the key changes sing along to that, or certain things from musicals back in the day, or even modern ones. But no, it's not something that I try and go for.
But I don't know if it was a fashion thing or if it's something a bit more fundamental than that. We'll just have to see. But I think the modulate, like now, if you do hear modulation in music, they're a lot more interesting. Can really add a lot of spice, flavour to a tune. And yeah, Frank Ocean's Bad Religion, if you haven't heard of it, definitely check it out.
I think, modulating a key, I think it's another tool in the toolbox. And if there's a scene that needs something, that a modulation could help out a scene or an emotion, or in a song, if that lifts it or brings it to an emotion or a level where I want to take it, then I will definitely use it. But it really just depends on the project and the scenario and what the music needs.
Being in one key is really easy kind of to remain stagnant and to remain, emotionally remain in one place. But for me, I don't write things in for the sake of writing them in. It has to serve the piece in one way or another. And so a lot of times when I use modulation, it's because it's adding to the piece. It just feels like something needs to happen. There needs to be a step up somewhere or a step down somewhere. There just needs to be a mood shift in whatever it is that I'm writing. And sometimes the modulation is just the tool to be able to use.
I want to try and help you feel confident in changing key as just it being a thing that you can try out. It's not a weird thing. I've given myself a rule, actually, that I'm only going to play examples of songs that have either been massive hits, have been on hit albums, or have got several million hits, several million plays on Spotify. So I'm not going to play you anything obscure, actually. Everything is a big, sort of well-loved track. What counts as a key change? So the ground rules. Let's say I'm in the key of A. When I say I'm in the key of A, all that means is that that's the home key. It's the place that I feel most settled in. I could go away, but it feels completely natural to come back. In that case, I played a D there. In that case, I'm in the key of A. I've established A for a while, I go somewhere else. A still feels like it's home. I can end the piece there. Whereas if I play this chord sequence here, that actually feels like home, doesn't it? I could just stop right there. That could be my ending. My old home, A, that doesn't really feel like home at all. F would be a much better ending, actually, than A. And that is a really good test of whether you've modulated. I had my first key, in that case, A, and it no longer feels like it's home, and a new chord, in this case, F, feels like it's home, like it's the tonic, then I know that I've changed key. I know that I've modulated. Changing key, modulation, just two words for exactly the same thing. So that's going to be our rule. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to have a low bar for what counts as a modulation. If we've moved away from that sense of home for a while, I'm going to be talking about that in terms of modulation or in terms of changing key. But I just want to say right from the outset is that it is just something that you can explore. You can just sit and play different chords and see how they feel without doing any theory. Sometimes I might be mentioning theory, but you can sort of take it or leave it depending on which way works best for you.
Yeah, just my favorite modulations are the ones that feel natural. It doesn't feel like we're trying to prove anything with a modulation. It's just a matter of here's my melody and here's where I want my melody to go. So now how can that harmony complement it and support it?
The first example I'm going to pick is one of the most covered songs in history, Yesterday by the Beatles. Wanted to start with this one, partly because it is a brilliant example of half modulation, where you're sort of, is it a modulation or isn't it? The other is that it's just written by someone who didn't read music, didn't study theory, and yet could sort of hear this. It's in the key of F. F is the home. Here we go. So it starts in F and ends in F. But does it go to D minor at some point? Let's just look at this little turn here. You'll see on the screen there that it goes F, E minor, A7, D minor. Don't worry if you're not a chordy person, just listen to the chords, what happens. Ta-da. There, creates tension and then releases. I could actually stop the piece there. Remember my test earlier on? If I stop there, would it sound okay? Let's try it. Actually, yes, I could finish the piece there. It would be a very short piece, but I could finish it. It feels natural at home. On the other hand, it stays there for such a small amount of time, it goes back to F. So, I don't know, is it in D minor for that moment? Maybe. It's your decision. That's what we call a half modulation, where it just goes somewhere, but it doesn't settle for long enough for you to feel like you've decisively left home. And the other thing that I want to point out, this is referring to our previous video, is that what we've done there is we've used this thing called the secondary dominant chord, where basically if you've got a chord, in this case D minor, if you play the 5 of that chord, 4, 5, that's an A, and play the 7th chord there, then it will make you want to go to D minor. I'm not going to go into that in a big way in this video, but it's worth knowing. So I just play this. As soon as I hit this one, the secondary dominant, it sort of makes you want to go there. It just feels natural. It's a trick that always works and that is used a lot in modulation. But I could just as easily use trial and error. You know, I just try a few chords out, see what works, and hit. Oh, what's that? G minor. Yeah, that works. And here's another example of the same phenomenon by Kendrick Lamar, These Walls. Listen to this.
Sex. She just wanna close her eyes and sweat.
I'll just play the chords over the top. So yeah, this has got a really similar thing that you could sort of debate how you hear it. Starts in C minor, so maybe that's the key. Then it goes to G minor, then G minor, C to F. So maybe it's sort of half modulated there and properly modulated when it hits this chord. Maybe, and it's in D flat, maybe you hear it that way. Or maybe you hear it in F, that it's just going like this. And that's home. I don't know. Or maybe you hear it in C minor and it's just going away from C minor right from the beginning. Different ways of hearing them. They're half modulations. The most important thing to say that it's definitely gone away from home by the time it hits that D flat. Okay. It's your choice about how to hear that. Those are sort of half modulations. There's something really specific about how he's achieved this smooth kind of sense of transition with this chord sequence. It's common notes or common tones.
I love common tones. I'm a fan of common tones, having one note that is a pedal and then being able to change the key around that so that pedal tone, the function of that note changes. But that obviously works best like when you're moving up like a half step or moving up a whole step. But it very much works modulating from any key if you use the harmony around it correctly.
So what Kendrick Lamar has done in this track is that he's made every single chord have an F in it, apart from the first one. Okay? So we go, I'm going to just play the Fs at the top. That's F. Just listen. There's the F. The next chord has F. The next chord has F. And the next one does as well. Here it is. Okay. So all of those chords have F, which gives a sense of smoothness, because there's something that's always there under all your chord sequences. And you can just... I'm going all over the place here. So the most important thing to say about this is that if you've got common tones, it will smooth things out. If you take away any common tones, it will create tension. So in the yesterday example, I play this chord. It's got no common tones with F, the E minor, so it automatically creates tension. A's got a common tone with E, so we're smoothly moving away. And then that moves us on somewhere else. So that's the most important thing to say about it. But I do just want to address this idea that you can create a common tone as a sort of bridge in the middle of a chord sequence. If you're stepping through a long chord sequence, you can use a common tone halfway through to sort of smooth the process to your final destination. So let's return to this chord sequence that I used earlier on. It's not the smoothest modulation of all time, but let's just look at what the common tones are doing to help. I've gone from A to F. Quite a long journey, and to smooth the process in the middle of it, that's where I've used the common tone. And the note that I've used as a common tone is that E there, which is in the chord of E, but it's also in the chord of C. And C is where we start to, that's the sort of first surprising chord that makes you go, ooh, we're no longer in A. So listen to this, that's the note we're looking out for. D, here's the E. Then when I go to C, so I've used that E to bridge that gap. Could you hear that? And often you find that people do it with the melody that they're singing. We'll also return to that. If you sing it in your tune, then it will help you. Okay, that just helps smooth it because I'm singing over that bridge. A really brilliant example of using a common tone which is sung. It's not in the underneath sort of chord sequences. Just by using that common tone at the actual point of transition is a song by Mitski. It cycles through this chord sequence. I'll let you listen to it once, and then I'll play the chords underneath so you can hear it that way. And then you'll hear this sort of surprise modulation. Here we go. We're in the key of C. And in a moment, we'll change to a G minor 9. There, that's the G minor 9. And basically all she's done is she's sung this note at the point of transition, the A, which takes us into the key change. We've gone from D minor, or possibly F, but we definitely end up in G minor, and she's playing a G minor 9 like this. There's the common tone. And just by really reinforcing that common tone, the A, it sounds emphatic. It also sounds sort of surprising, but it's less surprising than if you change the note. Let's do it again. Mitski's quite an interesting example, actually, of someone who uses melody really cleverly to smooth over chord sequence. And they've obviously got a taste for modulation. I could have picked lots of other songs, actually. I Bet on Losing Dogs is another one that is worth a listen. So, yeah, do take a listen to Mitski.
Pivot chords are also fun. Again, if you use them correctly. All of this is, at the end of the day, as long as you use it correctly, whatever that even means, as long as it's not like, look, I'm changing keys now. Like my favorite modulations are the ones that you don't really know they happen until they happen. Or until like a few bars after it happened. I'm like, oh, are we in a different key right now?
Okay, let's talk about something that Mitski definitely understands in some deep way, and that is the difference between chords that smooth things over and chords that create tension. So we're going to call the first one pivot chords and the second one tension chords. Okay, let's look at yesterday again. So on the left-hand side, everything, in this case just one chord, is in the key of F, the F. And on the right-hand side, everything works well over D. And you can tell, because if I try and play that stuff on the right over an F drone, it sounds a bit weird. And I play E minor, a bit strange, quite tense. The D's okay, but the A and the E are a little bit dissonant. The tension is really coming with that A chord, because that has got this C-sharp note, which you definitely won't find in an F. It sounds really dissonant and weird. So you'll hear it if I just sing it through. I'm at home. A little bit further away, really far away. Oh, I've reached a new home. That's kind of how it feels. I'm using this sense of tension and release. And depending on how many notes the chords share, how many notes they have in common, will tell you whether you're feeling more or less tense.
100%. Yes, I love tension and release. That's one of my favorite tools to use when arranging. Like it's this constant wave, this constant cycle of emotion and cycle of harmony and melody and dynamics and every musical vocabulary term under the sun, you know? It's never all gonna be one thing. Like I think tension and release, that push and pull is what makes great music.
Okay, another example which just sticks in a tension chord in order to move along is Quicksand by David Bowie. You can hear this section if you go about a minute into the track. He's gone through this verse, which is mainly in G and C. It's just moving between these two chords. And what he's going to try and do is get to these two chords, which don't have a lot in common. G and C only have one sharp, whereas A and D have three sharps. So he's going to have to do something to do this transition. And all he does is he just sticks in a tension chord, which takes him from one sort of area to the other. So he's starting with his tune. That's the first verse. Then he does his bridge section. He doesn't sing over it. A minor. Then he just hits an A major. Tension and release. And suddenly we move to the area of D and A. Really simple. Just by hitting that A chord makes us want to go to D. Create that tension, will beg for a release. So look at this chord sequence. I played this earlier on. If you look at this, you've got our starting point, A, our ending point, F. Every single chord in that journey from A to F either is in the key of A or it's in the key of F. There's not a single chord in that which is in both key signatures. So remember, our key A has three sharps, these. And so some of these chords fit into A, this one, D, this one, and none of the others. And the key of F has just one black note there, the B flat, and all the other chords fit into that key, but not into A. So at the beginning, all the chords are in A. At the end, all the chords are in F, but there's no chord, none of them are in both of those keys. That means there's no pivot chord. Okay, so now we're going to look at some tracks that do have pivot chords, chords that smooth the way between a transition. Okay, so let's recap. I'll show you a version of Yesterday notated in a way that is hopefully going to clarify this. Here you can see I've got the white line, which shows you when chords are in F, and the black line, which shows you when chords are in D minor. And some of these chords show up in two lines because they're in both keys. The F is the 1 of F. It's the first chord in the degree of the scale, but it's actually the third of D minor, D, E, F. It's the third note in that scale. And to take the example of B flat here, Okay, B flat is the fourth note of F, but it's the sixth note, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, sixth note of D minor, but it's in both chords. Those are pivot chords, those ones which are in both keys. Okay, whereas the E minor and the A7, they're not in F. They're in D minor, so you can see that they're not there on the top line. That is a case of where something is a tension chord. If you're only singing it in one line, it's more of a tension chord, or it's just in one key. When it's in both, it's always a potential pivot chord. So, I don't know, I was talking a lot of jargon there. I would say don't be anxious if it doesn't yet make sense. In fact, you can just use your ears to navigate through the rest of this video, but it might start helping you see where the tension and where the release is happening by looking at these charts that I've knocked up. Here's another quick example. It's another Beatles song, actually. I Want to Hold Your Hand. We're looking at the chorus here. It's in the key of C. And we're going to end up in F. We're going to use a combination of pivots and tension. The pivot chord is going to be the C itself, which is in the key of F and the key of C. And the tension chord is going to be this G minor, which is in the key of F, but isn't in the key of C. So here we go. I want to hold your hand. I want to hold your hand. Tension. Dun, 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 dun. Okay, have we changed key? We just do the test. Does it feel weird at that moment to go back to C? I'm going to go to C. Oh, it does feel weird to go back to C. It means we must have changed key, whereas it feels fine to be in F. That's our new home key. So far, so good. We will return to pivot chords later, but for now, something simpler. The most common place you'll find a key change these days is probably the step up transition. You can do step down, but step up is the one that you're most likely to hear. You'll hear it at the end of a talent show sort of ballad. You hear it at the end of I Will Always Love You, the Whitney Houston version. Does the classic thing of just going to a totally unrelated key with no chords in common, no common tones. It just goes whoosh, just literally going from one chord to the next chord. But this example I'm going to play to you by Beyonce, Love on Top, has just a slightly more sophisticated journey, I suppose you could say. This one doesn't have pivot chords. All she's doing is stepping from chords which are more in C, step by step, through to chords that have more in common with D flat. So she starts with C, adds this little flat there, which starts to take us towards flat keys. The F also got one flat, the A flat got 4 flats, C minor 3 flats, and then we've sort of gradually stepped so that join, whilst it still goes a little bit, it's smoothed out more than if I just went, I've got my love on top, I've got my love on top. It's a bit smoother journey than just stepping up. There's other examples of songs that just keep stepping up as the song goes on. Fever is a very famous example. Look that one up. Or Mac the Knife. There's lots of versions of that. Just steps up like several times through the course of the whole song.
Surprise modulations.
Okay, maybe you're thinking a lot of these tracks we've heard already have got quite a lot of surprises. And that's true. It's related to how ready you are for the change, how the artist has used tension chords, common tones, common chords, pivot chords, how they balance those to prepare you, the degree of surprise. So let's talk about that a little bit more, how the different levels of surprise that you can have. One way you can do it is to actually not play any chords during your transition. That might sound counterintuitive, but you could just play melody. And in that way, it sort of tricks the listener's ear into not getting too worried about the chords, but you've actually changed a lot. Listen to this example. This is the sort of thing that Beethoven would do. I forgot to bring any Beethoven books with me, so I'm just going to make something up in the style of Beethoven using a little bit of a tune from yesterday. So we'll do it in the key of F. And I'm going to try and find my way to D flat. And all I'm going to do is not play the chords. Listen to what happens. If I take a little like a bit of Yesterday, and I go sort of thing. Yeah, that sort of thing. Sorry about that wrong note at the end there. So I've actually found my way just simply by creating space. Here's another example from a track that I've used a lot in these videos, Life on Mars. So this is where you can have another degree of surprise, even if you are using a pivot chord. So listen to this little part of the just before, it's this kind of famous muso moment, really. So it's going from this point. So it's a real surprise. It has the common tone C, it's got a pivot chord C7. So it's not a complete surprise, and yet, I don't know, you don't really see it coming, do you? Not really. And that's because C7, in this context, is a tension chord. And we're so used to the convention of a tension chord being a secondary dominant and going like this, C7, F. We're so used to expecting that we're surprised when it goes somewhere else and goes here. So the A flat just feels like a surprise. Let's move on. Another way of doing this is to have a really fast moving chord sequence, which moves from A to B to C to D really, really quickly. So you don't get too stuck in one place for too long. Here's a brilliant example from an artist called Yebba. I really thank Tehillah for introducing me to her. This is a great track, I think. Then she carries on with a sort of similar chord sequence. And then she goes somewhere else. What's actually going on in this chord sequence? It's moving so quickly, I'm not even sure what key it's in sometimes. Is it really in B minor at the beginning? It's a bit like some of those examples earlier on. It's a matter of opinion, but the technique that she's using is A. She's moving through chords very quickly. You don't get settled too quickly. The other thing she does is she's got this brilliant melody which smooths its way over the chords, so you almost don't notice that they're doing quite unusual things.
How many years will it take for
Just moving in steps. So it's also got a really interesting sort of degree of surprise by using this stepping. It's often stepping through major chords, but stepwise, just going this sort of thing. And if you do that, if you just step through parallel major chords, either up or down, it will end up taking you somewhere different to where you started. But the degree of surprise is sort of somewhat smoothed by this stepwise thing that feels kind of natural. So it's not like doing chords where you're jumping around. There's no relation there, there's no pattern. And that feels very, very surprising. Whereas if I do in step, that's called a line cliche, where you just go down chromatically. Yebba uses a descending line cliche in the melody in a rather clever way in her track. Smooths it all out. And so slightly less degree of surprise by moving in step than from jumping. Okay, let's deal with one which is a key change, but doesn't really have a lot of surprises. Rehab by Amy Winehouse in the key of C. It's very, very much in C, and it does this little bit without preparation at all. It just goes. That section there. Amy is going to go from C to A minor. And what she's done, if you look at that whole top line there, every single one of those chords is a pivot chord. They're all in the key of A minor and the key of C. So it's going to feel not very surprising when she does that jump. They're all pivot chords.
So when I hit E minor, then A minor.
It just feels completely natural. So we have changed key, but it doesn't really feel that surprising, and that's because there hasn't been any tension chords. There hasn't been something which is only in one key. Everything is a pivot chord. Okay, this is an important topic, taking the bait of a chord change. I've dealt with this in more detail in our previous video, Chords 2. So just to put it in the context of changing key, here we go. Let's say I'm going to be in the key of G. I'm going to create some tension. I'm going to create myself a little bit of bait, and I'm going to just ignore it. I'm just going to go straight back to G. Listen to what happens. Tension there. And then I'm going to just go back. Oh, I haven't taken the bait. I've just ended up back in G again. That's one way of doing it. The other is I'm going to take the bait, and that would sound like this. Here we go. G,
D, G. Here's the tension chord. E7, A minor. I'm going to repeat.
E7. There it is again. A minor. And now I'm going to go with it. I'm not going to go to G. I'm going to go to F, G, C. And I'm moving away now from G. And now it feels like I could end there on that C. From G, I've sort of half modulated to A minor, and I've ended up in C simply by taking the bait. I've offered myself the opportunity to change and have taken it. That's a classic example of sort of chord sequence you might find in a show tune or a gospel track or a classical piece of music. What about an unusual chord sequence? This is something I think that Yebba's track did a little bit earlier, creating instability right from the start. The track that I'm going to choose with one of the most unusual vocals in history, we'll put a link to it below, is Wuthering Heights by Kate Bush. What she does is she creates instability straight away by using chords that don't have many common tones. They might have one common tone, but they don't have too many. They're definitely not sort of classic pivot chords. This is what the chord sequence sounds like. Da 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 da. She could take the bait there and move maybe to there, but she doesn't. She just goes back to the original key. Listen to what happens. What key are we in? Back to home. So even going sort of home to our home key of A feels a little bit surprising. So really unstable all the way through that. Really difficult to know where you are in a really interesting way with an incredibly clever melody. Da 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 da, dum ba 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 da da. Da 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 da. Okay, and what she's done is by setting up these different chord sort of areas in our mind by, we're starting in A, but then we visit this completely different chord. When she does finally move decisively to another key, it feels like at least we're ready for it. So it's created instability, which is a form of tension, isn't it? And then when we finally release, she goes on this really interesting journey. Here we go. So I'll take you from the last line of the verse and the transition through to the chorus.
Here we go. F sharp, G sharp, C sharp, our new key.
She actually just does a a 1-4-5 chord sequence. Later on in the chorus, it's actually a really, really simple chord sequence. But she's found this by creating this instability. She's opened our minds to all these possibilities of chord changing. So I think the headline here is that you can create instability, which gives you bait for changing. You can create that instability straight away in the track. So Yebba does it in her track. Kate Bush does it in the one that we've just done. Kendrick Lamar does it in a track like You. Listen to that and see that's just the letter U. Have a listen to that and work out what key you think that's in. Or These Walls, I think, does it. We discussed that right at the beginning of the video. So take a listen to those tracks and just see how they sort of open your mind to change right from the beginning. Where to look for good modulations or key changes? Well, we've done you a playlist. I mean, if you like the kind of things that we've just been listening to in the Kendrick Lamar tracks, you might want to listen to some of the sort of the jazz that they've been listening to, or it's actually some of the sort of yacht rock like Steely Dan and those kind of bands that they were sampling. LA producers and people like Thundercat, maybe some of the older generation, Miles Davis, Weather Report stuff from the 70s. You might like that. But we've also got examples from classical music, the 1800s, which was a sort of golden era of key changes for classical music, or Motown, also a sort of golden era of beautiful chord sequences. So do have an explore. Remember, just listening to loads of tracks is probably the better way of getting rooted in it, really understanding it at a deep level, whether you use the theory or not. I mean, you can have an amazing career in music without ever using a modulation, but it is there for you if you want. It's another door that you can open, another part of your ear that can be opened.